You know what finally made me rethink everything I thought I knew about feeding my garden? For nearly 20 years, I was the guy filling up a shopping cart with those colorful plastic bags of synthetic fertilizer and steer manure every April. I figured if the bag had a high price tag and a lot of promises on the back, my tomatoes would be happy. But about 7 years ago, I was walking through my friend Levi's farm in Lancaster County right around the time the ground was waking up. I looked at his soil. It was dark, crumbly, and smelled like a damp forest floor. And then I looked at my own garden back home, which felt more like dried out concrete. I realized right then that I was spending a small fortune to prop up my plants, while Levi wasn't spending a dime, and his dirt was alive. I've spent the last several seasons learning exactly how these families keep their grounds so productive year after year without a single trip to a big box store. And today I'm going to walk you through exactly how they do it and how you can start using it in your own backyard. And stick around to the end, because I'll share a specific liquid drench technique involving common weeds that acts like a shot of adrenaline for tired seedlings. I'll be the first to admit that my old way worked fine. I grew vegetables and we ate well, but I was on a treadmill. If I didn't buy the fertilizer, the plants suffered. It was a dependent system. When I started talking to my Mennonite neighbors about this, they introduced me to the concept of stewardship, the idea that we don't own the land, we're just looking after it for the next generation. In these communities, they don't see soil as a bucket you pour nutrients into. They see it as a living organism you have to feed. There's actually a lot of modern soil science from places like Penn State that backs this up now, showing how synthetic salts can actually hurt the microbial life that helps plants fight off disease. The Amish and Mennonite approach is about a closed-loop system where nothing is wasted and the waste from one part of the farm becomes the fuel for the next. The first thing Amish gardeners understand is that the soil should never be naked. In a conventional garden, we tend to clean everything up in the fall, leaving bare dirt exposed to the wind and snow. I did that for years because I thought it looked neat. But if you visit a Lancaster County garden in the off-season, you'll likely see a thick blanket of cover crops or a heavy layer of old stalks and leaves. They call it putting the garden to bed. If you're in zones 3 to 5, where the ground freezes hard, this is even more critical because it prevents the topsoil from scouring away. They use what they have: chopped corn stalks, oat straw, or even just the leaves raked from the yard. By keeping the ground covered, they're protecting the fungi and earthworms that are doing the heavy lifting underground all winter long. When I started leaving a heavy mulch of shredded leaves on my beds, I noticed that by spring, the soil stayed moist and was significantly easier to broad fork. This next piece is one that I completely overlooked for most of my gardening life, and it's the way they handle manure. Most of us go buy a bag of composted manure that's been sitting in plastic. My Mennonite friends use a stack system. They take the bedding from the chicken coop or the horse stable, and they don't just toss it in the garden fresh. That would burn the plants. They layer it with kitchen scraps and old hay in a dedicated spot, often near the edge of the woods, and let it sit for at least a full year, sometimes two. They call it mellowing. It's not just about the nitrogen. It's about the carbon and the life that moves into that pile. I've watched them turn these piles by hand with a pitchfork, and the heat coming off them, even in November, is incredible. For those of you in zones 6 and 7, starting a mellowing pile right now means you'll have the richest black gold you've ever seen by next spring. It won't cost you a cent if you have a neighbor with a few chickens or a horse. Now here's where the Amish approach really comes together, and it's something called green manuring on a small scale. You don't need a tractor for this. I watched an Amish neighbor show me how he uses peas and oats in early spring. He sows them thick, lets them grow about 6 inches high, and then just hoes them right back into the top 2 inches of dirt. He's not harvesting the peas. He's growing them specifically to feed the soil. It adds organic matter and nitrogen right where the next crop, usually something heavy feeding like corn or cabbage, is going to go. I'll be honest with you, the first time I did this, I felt like I was wasting seeds. I wanted to eat those peas, but the difference in the following crop was so dramatic that I never looked back. It turns your garden into a self-feeding engine. I want to be upfront here because I think honesty matters more than hype. This next step, which involves mineral cycling, isn't a quick fix. In many Amish households, the wood ash from the winter heating stove is treated like precious metal. They don't just dump it in a heap. They sprinkle it very thinly, almost like a dusting of powdered sugar, over the beds in late winter. This returns the potassium and calcium that the trees pulled out of the deep earth back into the garden soil. If you're in zones 8 and 9 where the soil can be more alkaline, you have to be careful with this. But in the acidic soils of the Northeast, It's a game changer. I started using my fire pit ashes this way, and my root crops, especially the carrots, have never been sweeter or straighter. This next part is the part that surprised me the most, and it's the use of pond muck, or creek silt. If an Amish family has a stream or a pond on their property, they'll often go in during a dry spell and bucket out the sediment that's settled at the bottom. This stuff is packed with minerals that have washed down from the surrounding hills. They spread it thin over the garden. It's heavy work, but it's a free source of trace minerals that most of us would have to buy in a bag of azomite or green sand. If you're picking up what I'm putting down and you want more of these deep dives into how Amish and Mennonite families approach the garden, hit subscribe. I got a lot more of these coming. Now let's keep going. And this is where you start to see how it all connects. This isn't a standalone trick. It's one piece of a system. The cover crops protect the soil. The mellowed manure feeds the microbes. The wood ash balances the pH, and the green manure adds the structure. If you just do one, it helps. If you do them all, you stop needing the store-bought stuff entirely. I've noticed a few patterns over the years, habits I used to have that were actually working against me. I did these myself for years, so no judgment here. The first is over-tilling. I used to think the soil had to look like coffee grounds before I could plant. But I learned from my Amish neighbors that too much tilling actually destroys the house the soil microbes live in. Now I use a broad fork to just loosen the ground without flipping it. Another pattern is treating weeds like enemies to be hauled away. In the Amish system, if a weed hasn't gone to seed, it's just more organic matter. They'll often hoe it and leave it right there to rot back into the dirt. I used to spend hours bagging up waste that was actually free fertilizer. The biggest mistake, though, is thinking about soil as a seasonal task. I used to think about it in April and forget in July. The Amish think about it 365 days a year. Everything they do, from where the kitchen scraps go to how they walk between the rows, is about preserving that soil life. Now, here's something I picked up from an Amish family that I haven't seen mentioned in any gardening guide, and it's what I teased earlier, the stinging nettle tea. Now, don't worry, it's not for you to drink. They find a patch of nettles, harvest them with gloves, and stuff them into a 5-gallon bucket of rainwater. They let it sit for about 2 weeks until it smells pretty ripe. Then, they dilute it, about 1 part tea to 10 parts water, and use it to water their young starts right after transplanting. Nettles are incredible dynamic accumulators, meaning they pull deep minerals up into their leaves. By soaking them, you're making those minerals immediately available to your young plants. I started doing this 3 years ago, and I've seen my transplant shock almost disappear. It's simple, it's free, and it works better than any starter fluid I ever bought in a bottle. Realistic first-year expectations are that you'll see your soil become easier to work and you'll see more earthworm activity. You might not see a 200% increase in your harvest overnight, but you're building a foundation. Improve your technique each year, and those numbers climb, but I'd rather you start with honest expectations and be pleasantly surprised by the long-term health of your land. That's what I've learned from Amish and Mennonite gardeners about feeding the soil without opening your wallet. It's about working with what you have and respecting the cycles that were here long before us. If any of this changed how you think about your dirt, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Do you have a free fertility tip you've used? Let's talk about it down there. Hit subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into how traditional communities grow food with methods that have worked for generations. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.